Lots of folks broke the law in the 20s, but didn't go to jail. Drinking was illegal. Throughout the decade, prohibition was the law of the land. 1,500 federal agents tried to enforce the law, but they were no match for the bootleggers, rum runners, hijackers, and racketeers. Some, like Scarface Al Capone, seemed almost beyond the law. Texas Guinan was queen of the speakeasies. When the police raided one of her glamorous nightclubs, she just laughed at them and opened another. Some Americans considered prohibition a noble experiment, but it didn't stop people from drinking. In fact, it resulted in widespread disrespect for the law. In time, the mounting public outcry against prohibition would lead to its repeal. There were other legal battles in the 20s. A Tennessee law prohibited teaching any theory other than the divine creation of man. John Scopes, a high school biology teacher, was brought to trial for teaching Darwin's theory of evolution. Millions listened at home by their radios to the arguments from the packed courtroom as Clarence Darrow defended Scopes, and William Jennings Bryan stood for the prosecution. "I am more interested in the Rock of Ages than the Age of Rocks," Bryan said. He won the case on a technicality, but lost supporters who thought him foolish and old-fashioned. Many Americans in the 20s were frightened by changes they didn't understand, by new ideas and foreign accents. So we passed laws restricting immigration. 2 Italian immigrants became symbols of our fear. In 1921, Sacco and Vanzetti were convicted of robbery and murder and sentenced to death. Many believed the evidence against them was largely circumstantial and that they'd been convicted because they were foreigners. Despite social problems, by 1924, business was booming. Most Americans were enjoying a new prosperity. When they went to the polls in November, they voted to keep cool with Coolidge. Prosperity was popular, and he won by a landslide.
These are some of the reasons why I want to cut down public expense. I want the people of America to be able to work less for the government and more for themselves. I want them to have the rewards of their own industry. This is the chief meaning of freedom.
Under Coolidge, freedom from government interference meant greater profits for big business. Most Americans measured prosperity by what they were able to buy. Many of the luxuries of only a few years before could now be bought on time. Herbert Hoover, a successful businessman and brilliant engineer, had served as Secretary of Commerce for most of the decade. In 1928, when Coolidge announced that he did not choose to run, the Republicans chose Hoover as their candidate. The Democrats picked Al Smith, the popular governor of New York, but the Catholic politician was no match for the great businessman. Endorsed by big business and supported by most Americans who were anxious to see prosperity continue, Hoover won the election by a wide margin. When Hoover took office in '29, the mood of the country was optimistic. The years of prosperity had led to the feeling that everyone was meant to be rich. In 1929, many were buying stocks, making fortunes overnight. In little more than a year, steel had doubled, and radio jumped 5 times. The country was in a frenzy of speculation, buying more and more stocks with money we didn't have. Then, in October, the stock market collapsed, and with it the fortunes of millions. In the closing weeks of the decade, few could predict the terrible consequences of the economic collapse.